Well, I want to welcome everybody at all of our campuses today, whether in Wexford or Oakland, Sewickley Valley, East End, or Dormont. If you're here for the first time today, you came on a really good weekend because we're kicking off a brand new series called Engage and Influence, a study of Daniel. And so to kick off this entire series, I thought that I would start with a story. Okay, you ready? All right. So a couple months back, I was home alone, which is, as a dad, I cherish some time alone, right? And then I heard the doorbell ring. And so I figured it was probably one of the neighborhood kids that was wanting to play with one of the pink life. And if you're new today, you need to know that that's what I refer to my 3 daughters, okay? I live in a pink world, everybody. I have a wife and 3 daughters, and even my dog is a girl. There we go, okay? So I figured that it was probably just one of the neighborhood kids. So I opened up the door, and there this guy was. Mid-20s, clipboard in hand. He had a name tag on his chest right next to the company logo that he worked for. And it's been a long time in my neighborhood since I've actually seen a door-to-door salesman. Now, I have nothing against door-to-door salesmen, but let me ask you, what's your first reaction when a door-to-door salesman comes to your door? Okay, just think about that, and let me tell you how it went down for me, okay? So this guy says to me, "Hi, sir, how are you doing today?" And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you don't care how I'm doing today. You just want to sell me something, right? But what came out of my mouth was, "I'm fine, thank you," right? And then he started, okay? He opened up with this question that you could tell that he was trained to ask anybody who opened up the door. And then after his opening question, I thought that I was going to get an opportunity to actually answer the question. But he didn't let me. He just kept going. He just kept talking. And then he kept talking. And he kept talking. He would not let me get a word in edgewise, right? This guy had a presentation that he had rehearsed. He had an agenda that he needed to get across to me. And I began to think to myself, like many of you probably do, how am I going to get out of this? Right? How do I gently let this guy down, right? How I tell him I'm not interested in this. But this guy, he would not stop talking. And so I did what, the only thing left that I could do. I slammed the door in his face. I'm kidding, I didn't do that. You thought I did, right? You thought I did, but I did not do that. But here's what I did. I said, hold on, man. And I do the timeout. Hold on, man. Listen, I appreciate you, and I know you got to do your job and everything, but listen, I'm not interested in what you're trying to sell me because I actually already use a product that's similar to what it is that you're selling me, so I'm good, man. I don't need what you're selling to me. And then you could tell that his training kicked in, all right, because it was like his advisor said, well, if somebody says that, then you say this, and then he just started up again. And I was, I'm home alone, I'm cherished time as a dad, and I'm just trying to get some alone time, right? And so I was starting to get a little annoyed. And so, excuse me, sir, I'm not interested in buying your product, okay? And then I kid you not, this guy copped an attitude with me. At my door, a complete stranger. He got an attitude with me. And he started to get combative about the product that I use compared to the product that he's trying to sell me. I just couldn't believe it, right? And so here's this guy, and I'm like, I can't believe this is happening right now. And I said, you know what, man? I'm not interested. The conversation's over. Thank you. Have a nice day. And as he went away, he began to just say stuff to me on the way, as he's going throughout the rest of the neighborhood. I could not believe this interaction with this particular door-to-door salesman. Now, why do I tell you this crazy story to start out this series? As I began to prepare, this came to my mind, and here's why. I believe that times have changed. I believe that we are living in a post-door-to-door salesman culture. Okay, right? Think about this. With the advancement of technology today, with the advancement of advertising, I no longer need you coming to my door and telling me, selling to me what you think I need. Because my new front door is actually in the palm of my hand for what it is that I want and I need. It's called my smartphone. I don't need you any longer, right? Times have changed. And the way that culture engages consumers has changed, am I right? right? See, everyone knows that if you want to influence customers today, consumers today, that you're going to have to engage them differently than you did 30, 40, 50 years ago. So why am I saying all of this as we start this study of Daniel? Well, as it pertains to the church and Christianity in America today, we have to recognize that times have really changed in our culture. That the church is living in a post-Christian culture. America is not a Christian nation. A massive majority of America wants nothing to do with our product, everybody, right? Because they're good with what they are using. They're good with how they are living. Non-Christians, non-believers are not buying what we are selling, so to speak, right? And sadly, here's what's happened. The perceived response of the church to the ever-changing culture has been one that's combative in nature. So much so that many have shut the door on the presentation of Christianity. They no longer want to hear what Christians have to say. The way that the church has engaged the ever-changing culture has left many disinterested, bored, hurt, and really angry at people who call themselves Christians. So, what are Christians supposed to do about that? How are Christians supposed to live then in a post-Christian culture? And you can feel the tension, can't you, in our culture? Christians of all ages feel this tension that's been building for years. Christians can become overwhelmed by a culture that challenges our beliefs, right? It seems to be less Christian than it was in the past. Now it seems to be even faithless. That's what this series is going to be all about, everybody. It's something that we as a teaching team feel very strongly about for our church today. And the title of this series is actually one of our core values here at Northway. We want to be a church that engages and influences culture, not runs away from it and slams the door on it. So, we've decided to study the book of Daniel this year. And if you're newer with us today, you need to know that this is something that we do every year, that we've been doing for the past several years, where we pick a book of the Bible that we're going to study. And so maybe if you've been with us for a while, you'll recognize some of these series that we've been in. Take a look at these. So these past book studies, in 2008, we studied a series called Subversive Kingdom, where we studied Colossians. And then James in 2009, Ephesians, and then Acts in a great series called Back in the Day. We studied Nehemiah, and then Peter, and 1st and 2nd Peter. And then last year we studied with a series called Right in Your Own Eyes, the book of Judges. And now we've chosen to study Daniel for this year. And we're going to do it in 2 different series, okay? So the first one's going to be 4-week series, and we're going to do that from this point forward. And then we're going to take a break for a while. We're going to do some series in between, and then right before the fall, we're going to do the second series of Daniel. And we've chosen to study Daniel because of something in particular. Because Daniel lived in a hostile culture that did not believe in his God. He remained faithful to God, though. How did he do that? That's what we're going to study. He was courageous, and he was still loyal to God. And check this out. He actually lived his life in such a way that it was attractive to the people who were around him that didn't even believe in his God. And eventually, it transformed the world around him. Daniel is one of the best models that we have for engaging and influencing culture today. So, at all of our campuses, if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Daniel 1, and while you're getting there, let me recommend some books to you that are not the Bible. And so, I put them on your outline. You can see them in there. And if you want to dig deeper into Daniel during this study over the summer, because we're not going to be doing a verse-by-verse study of Daniel, okay? We've chosen 7 different portions of the book of Daniel, and if you want to dig deeper, then you can pick up these different resources that we have. So take a look at these. This is what the teaching team recommends. Now listen, we might not agree with everything that's in these books, But they're really good to study the different angles and different approaches of what people see in Daniel. So the first one is this, Larry Osborne. I personally highly recommend this book. I've read all three of them, and for me, this one was the easiest to read, okay? It was sort of, it felt, kind of my pace, Then the second one is John Lennox, Against the Flow. And as I mentioned these are going to get a little bit harder, more intellectual with each book as we go along. John Lennox, Against the Flow. And then the third one is George M. Schwab, Hope in the Midst of a Hostile World. Now that for me was a bit heady. Okay, so if you're really into that might be your speed, okay? Now check this out. Also, by a way of introduction for this whole series, one of our longtime members and small group leaders, an incredible teacher of the Bible, her name is Judy Stecklow. She has written a devotional to coincide with each week of this series. So if you're interested in receiving an email devotional, shows up in your inbox, then you can literally take out your phone right now and you can text Northway to 42828. It'll prompt you and then it'll show up in your inbox on Monday morning, okay? Some great resources there for you if you want to dig in further in this study. So let's dig into Daniel 1, verse 1. Here we go, okay? In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. He attacked it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Now, with that introduction right there, Daniel tips his hat to a major theme that we're going to see throughout the entire book of Daniel. And we could go all theological term on it and call it the sovereignty of God, or we could just say this, that God is in control of who is in control. Okay, that's the sovereignty of God. God's in control of who is in control, whether it is the king Nebuchadnezzar or whether it's your boss, right? Whether it's the president of the United States or the president of your school board. God is in control of who is in control. Now, let me give you some backstory of history to this book of Daniel that's going to help us throughout this entire series. Recorded in the history books, not just the Bible, everybody, but in world history. In 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babylon, and Judah fell under his control. And with this, King Nebuchadnezzar initiated a deportation across the board of the best people from Jerusalem, Judah area, and he deported them to Babylon. And this occurred in essentially 3 different waves. And so what we read, according to Daniel 1:1, that timestamp that's right there, it leads us to believe that Daniel was one of the first waves of those who were deported into Babylon, along with his 3 friends that we're going to learn about later. Now, catch this background before we get into the story. Daniel, who's an Israelite teenager, and his 3 friends, teenagers, have just been ripped away from their hometown, okay, which is Jerusalem. You might remember this as the promised land if you've studied Genesis, right? And so their God that they worship is Yahweh, the same God that we were just worshiping today here at Northway, right? And so what has happened is that they are thrown into a region of Babylon that his forefather Abraham, you remember that name from Genesis, that he left that area. God told him to leave that area and said, you're going to go to a new place, the promised land of which I'm going to tell you. And so what happened now as he leaves that region of Babel, which is now Babylon here, is that these 4 teenagers are ripped from there and placed into Babylon. That's what's happening here. And then they are ripped into this brand new city that's steeped in an occult. And they're worshiping the false god of Marduk that's led by this power-hungry king, Nebuchadnezzar. So they're ripped from their land, forced into a foreign land, right? And they were stripped of their identities. They were given new names. So check this out. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were given new names by the Babylonians. And it was Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, okay? And those names that were given to them, they were closely linked to the worship of gods of the Babylonian pantheon. You see what they're doing there? They're stripping them of any particular, association with God, Yahweh, and they're giving them a new identity. And so they had to undergo this 3-year occult curriculum where they had to learn about these false gods of the pantheon to turn them into real Babylonians here so that they would no longer have that allegiance to this Yahweh. Now they would be allied to Marduk, okay? So these guys have no choice to live in this culture. Now here's what I want you to see. A little bit of history there. I know that some of you eyes glaze over. Check back in with me, okay? Check this out. Now I want you to see how these 4 teenagers, especially Daniel, engaged in this hostile culture. How did they live out their faith in this hostile culture? Because that's how we're going to clue in how do we live out our faith today. Now, up until this point, Daniel and his 3 friends, no recorded resistance at all to the assimilation into the Babylonian culture. But something happens, and now they dig in. Let's take a look at Daniel 1, verse 8. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Let's stop. Why? Why would he do that? Some commentators think it's about the dietary laws of the Old Testament, but I'm not sure that that's it because it mentions wine here. See, what was going to happen here is according to Daniel's faith in God, this command to eat the king's food was going to cause him to sin against God because the food would have been sacrificed to the god Marduk. Right? The wine would have been set apart in worship to this false god, Marduk. And this is where we see Daniel dig in. It's as if he says, listen, I'm not going there. This is going to cause me to sin against my God, and I'm not going to do it. Therefore, let's take a look what happened. Verse 8. Therefore, Daniel asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him. This is the main guy in charge over them. He asked him not to defile himself. And look at this. God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of this chief of eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, hey man, listen, I like you, but I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. He basically says, listen man, I like you and all, but I value my life. And I don't want to die. So no, you can't do this. Which is completely understandable, right? I mean, right? He's in authority. He doesn't want to die. That's a good reason to say no. Because if the king were to see Daniel and his 3 friends looking all sickly, then this, King Nebuchadnezzar would come to this guy by the name, his name is Ashpenaz. Sweet name, right? Hey, Ashpenaz. All right, love that. Okay? And so I want you to see something. Daniel got the no from the main guy in charge. And I want you to see how he responds here. Instead of becoming combative, Daniel becomes creative. Look at this, verse 11. Then Daniel said to the steward, the second guy in charge, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, hey, test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food to be observed by you. And deal with your servants, he put it on them, according to what you see. So this guy listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days, which is huge. And at the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward, second guy in charge, took away their food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. I want you to see something here. Instead of Daniel becoming combative when he got the no, he got creative, right? Instead of railing on his captors in anger, no, Daniel calmly came up with a creative solution to his problem. And this is a principle here that I want you to get lodged into your heart over this entire series, okay? We're going to see it throughout the entire book of Daniel, this principle right here. If you're taking notes with me, this is kind of the main thing that I want you to remember the entire time of this series and especially this sermon today. Here it is. To influence change, you have to engage. To influence change, you have to engage. See, Daniel didn't go off on Ashpenaz when he got the no. No. He just collected his thoughts. He went back to the drawing board and he went to the next guy. And he said, hey man, test us, but let's keep this a secret, right? This little diet that he did was private. Nobody knew. It wasn't thrown out on social media for all Babylon to hear, right? So, you see that Daniel stood up for God, and he did it in a really smart and creative, God-honoring way. And also in a way that would honor these guys who were in charge, because Daniel actually cared about their lives as well. See, Daniel had this incredible gift for being known for what he was actually for than what he was against, right? And so it's obvious that these guards, we'll call them guards, that they actually liked Daniel and his three friends. Think about it. For this second guy to even grant this request, he must have really respected Daniel, right? He must have thought there was something about him that, yeah, I can do that for you. So I bet you that Daniel did the hard work of honoring this guy before he made the request. I bet you that he did the hard work of making conversation and friends with this guy. Daniel obviously engaged him before he asked for him to change something. And because Daniel went about it in a very honoring and civil kind of way, the guy allowed it. So to influence change, you have to engage the culture, right? See, this doesn't mean, everybody, please don't hear this, doesn't mean that you have to participate, but it's following the words of Jesus. Do you remember what he said to us? Be in the world, not of it, right? But let's be honest for a second this weekend. I'm not sure that the church actually responds that way to our culture today. See, I think that the people of our culture who do not believe what we believe, the people of the world who don't believe in Jesus, they actually know what we're against more than what we're for. See, and whether it's completely accurate or not, the church is widely known as judgmental, as anti-gay, as way too political, way too hypocritical, and way too sheltered from the world that keeps changing. See, many people in our culture, they don't even know what we're actually for, which is grace, which is hope, which is love. They don't know that we're for the Jesus because they can't see the Jesus in us. See, because what they see on TV and social media is anything but attractive to the culture today. I want you to see that Daniel, he didn't rail against the people who didn't agree with him. They obviously didn't agree and have the same views of God that Daniel did. And I want you to see during this series that Jesus didn't rail on the sinners of his day. No, he pursued them with love. Right? You know who Jesus blasted during his time? The religious hypocrites. That's who he blasted, who were attempting to keep people away from God and make it hard for them to know God's love for them. So Northway, please hear me on this. Hear me. We're never going to be able to persuade anybody if our knee-jerk response is one of anger and resentment and disrespect and scorn to the culture, right? We cannot toss these verbal Molotov cocktails in the name of Jesus and then claim that we love our enemies. Nobody's going to listen. And they should not. See, can I just talk really quickly about something specific? Social media, I believe, can be a really good thing, but can also be a very terrible thing. And let me just say it straight out to all of you. If you are a friend of Northway on your social media accounts and you are going to throw out hate speech on your accounts, please defriend us, because that is not who we are. We want to be known as a church who loves, who engages the culture and wants to influence them with a message of hope, of grace, of a God who loves. Please stop it. See, listen, how do we do this today? How do we engage our culture who is post-Christian? How do we live like this? Throughout the book of Daniel, you're going to see 3 different ways that I see that he engages and influences the culture. If we are going to influence change, then we're going to have to engage as a church humility. If you're taking notes with me, that's on there. Engage humility. Daniel was humble. He knew his place. He understood that even in a hostile culture, he needed to submit to those who are in authority. He didn't always have to be right. But you know what he did? He earned the right to be heard, right? He was able to do so very well because he knew the principle of who he was and who his God was, that God is in control of who is in control. And I could go so many different ways with this piece of humility, but I want to give you a word picture. What does humility actually look like in our actions? And Paul helps us with this in the New Testament as he's telling Titus to address the church to act in humility. Look what he says. Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work. Watch this one. To speak evil of no one, to avoid quarreling, to be gentle, to show perfect courtesy towards all people. So as Christians, we are to walk in humility, not just with Christians, but before all people. And at the right time, God will raise up those who will humble themselves. Well, you might be thinking right now, you know what, Pastor Kent? You don't know my boss. He's a straight up jerk. All right? That might be true, but he's your boss. He's the one who's in charge, and you are supposed to be a humble Christian. Do what your boss tells you to do unless he tells you to sin. Trust that God is in control of who is in control. But you might be thinking right now, you know what, Pastor Kent, that elected official of our city, you know what? He's running our city into the ground. You know, that guy, he's running our whole state into the ground. That guy, he's running the whole United States of America into the ground. Unless you're going to run for office and influence change in the proper way, stop running your mouth and start praying for that person who is in charge. And do it quietly in your prayer closet and try to influence change creatively, because you need to be a humble person who respects authority, because God is in control of who is in control. We as Christians are supposed to be influencing change by being humble in this culture. That's the first way, humility. The second way that we see Daniel influence change is by engaging wisdom. He's a very wise guy, right? Daniel did what was right at the right times. And instead of combating when he got the no, he got creative until he got the yes. He used wisdom, and God granted him that wisdom of how to navigate in this hostile culture. And he was still able to honor God in the process and also honor others who were around him. And something that we're going to see throughout the entire book of Daniel is this. There isn't one cookie cutter way to face obstacles in this life. Different situations are going to call for different kinds of actions, and God can give us that kind of wisdom to navigate through a culture like this. So we as a Christians, we should be smart how we engage the culture. The third way that we see Daniel influence change is by engaging hope. And I really hope you hear this. We should be known for the hope that we have, not for what we're against. Daniel knew that his almighty God was going to pull through for him, and his faith infused hope into others, and they could see that something was different about him, and they found favor on Daniel. He knew that God was going to come through for him, and even if he didn't, he would still follow God anyway. I want you to see how God responds. Let's see how this particular portion of Daniel's life wraps up. As for these 4 youths, verse 17, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, right? In the 3-year occult training, they excelled in their classes. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the 3-year time, when the king, wait, just stop there for a second. 3 years of vegetables, everybody. Right? Think about it, right? I don't know if I could do it, but Daniel did it, right? At the end of 3 years, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. Among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, Nebuchadnezzar found them 10 times better than all of the magicians and the enchanters that were in his kingdom. In the midst of a hostile culture, God pulled through for Daniel. And the hope that this solidified in Daniel's life permeated out to those who were around him. And it was preparing him for what was going to happen that we're going to study in the rest of this series. We're going to see in the following weeks of this series that God can be trusted. We can put our hope in him even when things seem to be getting worse and worse and worse, like it did for Daniel and his 3 friends. See, Daniel's engagement of the culture is something that we should put into practice. And it reminds me of what our early church leader, Peter, what he wrote to the church. Look at what he says. Even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason. Say that word with me. For the hope that is in you. Watch this. Yet, do it with gentleness and respect. And this is what Daniel did. Exactly what he did. And we're going to see throughout this series, this is what he continues to do. Everybody, this is going to be a great series. I'm excited for you to keep coming back and hearing the next several weeks of this series. And I want to leave you with a final thought today from Larry Osborne's book, Thriving in Babylon. He writes this. Everybody, perk up for this. Here, this is what I want you to leave with today. If we want to significantly influence our modern day Babylon, we'll have to change our tactics. Instead of avoiding or attacking the godless leaders of our day, we'll need to begin to engage them in the same way Daniel did, humbly serving whomever God chooses to temporarily place into positions of authority. It's the only way we'll ever earn the right to be heard. And then he says this, without contact, there can be no impact. So Northway, listen, to influence change, we have to engage the culture. And the way that we should do that is with humility, wisdom, and hope. My encouragement to all of us during this entire series and the rest of our lives is please do not be like that door-to-door salesman who got really combative with me. Nuh-uh. We have to approach our culture differently today because times have changed and we need to engage our culture with wisdom, hope, and humility. Would you please stand with me?